Thank you, Ben. Ooh. Oof. I warned Dave when he asked me to speak that asking me to speak at a conference is a little bit like taking a knife to a gunfight. I am addicted with ADHD, and so as we move along here, if it's confusing, then I want you to be comforted to know that's my purpose. I do want to confuse you because we're going to talk about this thing called a hybrid. My story starts really as a kid. I was a kid who grew up in a wonderful family. Just an incredible family. Ed and Juanita Moran did as much as any parent could do. I mean, they could have done more, but they provided safety and security. They loved me. They raised me in a suburban atmosphere. And as a result of that, somehow I gained a desire to live off of love of other people. And so I was this little kid who was always seeking everyone's favor. I learned to manage my image. I was the kind of guy I was a chameleon. I could be whoever I needed to be so that you would love me, you would like me. And I kind of had this sense of control, that I could control what you thought about me. And then when I became conscious of the world and God and spiritual things, I thought the same thing about God. I thought I could earn His favor. I thought that I could do things in such a way to make Him like me. And it took a few years for me to come to grips to the realization that I needed to be on a journey from earner to heir in my relationship with God. That I couldn't earn His favor. That, in fact, there was nothing that I could do to make God like me. That He had demonstrated His love for me in the face of my rebellion, in the face of my being an enemy, of constantly, by my little acts of currying favor, I was flipping Him off and just injuring His heart on a regular basis. And He still loved me. He still wrapped His arms around me and helped me. Well, that experience affected my entire life because it caused me to want to invite other people into the same discovery of learning what it was like to live in the favor of not just their Creator, but their Father. They could have this relationship in the family, and that relationship would give them life, not only in the world to come, but now. And so I went on to college and then ultimately to seminary. And I graduated and went out into the church world, and I discovered that churches really didn't like people who were far from God. Now, that's an odd thing, I know. It just seems like a stray, but it was really maddening to me that there wasn't a sense that the church was here for people who really didn't have a relationship with God. It was only here for people who did. And so I am not exactly, I lost my desire to curry favor. In fact, I maybe swung to the other side, and I just moved in a direction that was really counterintuitive. It was sitting in the left field bleachers at Willow Creek Community Church that my wife turned to me after one of Bill Hybels' amazing messages about building a church for the unchurched, and she turned to me and she said, "I think you could do this." Now, by that time in my life, I had been involved in the church staff for 6 years. I had moved to Kansas City. I'd worked as the vice president of human resources for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes here in town, out of their national headquarters. And I had decided that really what I wanted to do was to move to Colorado Springs to work for some Christian organization there so I could do my Christian thing during the week and ski on the weekends. That was life. But God had other ideas. When Candy turned to me and she said, "I think you could do this," she was breathing literally the breath of God into my life. And it caused me to go into a super, super deep turmoil. I mean, just wrestling with, I did not want to hitch my life to this thing called the church. I use the little c here, not the big C. Jesus loves the church, that's us. that kind of stuff. I understand that. But when I use the church, most of the time I'm talking about the little C, the local church. It was a hard place to work. I mean, I don't know if you've experienced this, but the reality is that there's nothing meaner than a Christian who thinks you're wrong. I mean, they just like get the Kevlar on, my friend. It's like coming at you. So I didn't want to do that, but God began to work in us and me and disturb me in such a deep way that 6 weeks later, I pulled in all my resumes and said, we're staying here. We're going to plant a church that has a passion for reaching people far from God. And you're sitting in our building right now. You're sitting in an auditorium. And what we do on Sunday morning, probably most of you wouldn't like. You wouldn't attend here if you lived in Kansas City. We don't do any musical worship on Sunday morning. Chris Tomlin doesn't show up so you can go, yay, yay, Jesus. Just doesn't happen here. But over time, and that means that people don't come here from other churches, okay? And I know what's on your mind. I love the question that people ask me. I said, we don't do musical worship on Sunday morning. And here's the question I get. I said, you don't do musical worship on Sunday morning? Okay. What do you do? I mean, are we that uncreative to think that if we could gather a room full of people who are spiritually seeking, that we couldn't find something creative to do to start a discussion with them? Are we that so totally brainless that we can't do that? Well, we attempt it every Sunday morning here. And we do some crazy things. We do things that, are fun and exciting and edgy and stuff. And so we began building this thing. And in that process, we put a pin in the map, and we figured, we listened to all the church growth experts, draw a line on that map, 30 minutes, that's where people come, and when you do that around here, you get about 300,000 people. In our county, just like many other counties in the Midwest, and as you go further to the east and west, you get some degradation, but in our county, about 1 in every 5 people actually show up in church on Sunday morning. Now, I know that a lot of people say that 40% of Americans say they attend church. Well, that doesn't really mean squat, because 40% of Americans say a lot of things they don't do. When we ask people, how many of you voted? More people say they voted than actually voted, because we know how many people vote. We count the votes. And then when we survey and we say how many people voted, it goes up. Same thing with church. About 1 in 5 people attend church in Clay County. So we began praying for those folks. And we have earnestly, over the past 17 years, sought to engage with them. We have assaulted them with emails and billboards and personal invitations and yard signs. And you name it, we've done it to attract people here on Sunday morning. Well, we moved into this building in 2003, and all of a sudden, we were on the map. We were across the freeway over here, over in the little community of Liberty, and they have a community center. We rented that for 7.5 years. And when we moved over here, we were 170 people. And then all of a sudden, this building was magic. I mean, it just exploded. And it wasn't a DMM thing. People were coming, and we don't even know where they're coming from. It was crazy. And as a result of that, quickly, this beautiful gift that we were given, this tool of ministry that we had in our hands, we discovered had a date stamp on it. And that date stamp would recognize the expiration of this tool as being effective in our community, because it would just be packed. And so we began to look for a scalable model for ministry, and we went all over the place. We went to the West Coast. We went out west to North Coast and explored video venues and explored sort of a cell-modeled church group. Or we went to the East Coast and looked at Seacoast and looked at multi-site. And we went to Chicago to talk to the rapidly church multiplication folks there at Community Christian. And so we went everywhere. And everywhere we went, we discovered that the style of ministry that we do here on Sunday morning is difficult to reproduce. I mean, there's just too many, you see that video that opened the conference. You see the musicians that are able to do those kinds of things. We do that stuff on a regular basis around here. And it takes really talented people. And it's hard to find just enough to do what we do. And so we were stymied by God. We couldn't go anywhere. And so then we began to look. And all this time, there was a whiteboard in my office. And on that whiteboard, there was a little sort of a thing up in the top. It said Bouge Pori. For the longest time, I spelled it wrong. Couldn't even spell it right. Bouge, I wrote it up there because I'd heard this story about this guy, Watson, who did something in India, and it was miraculous, and numbers that were unbelievable. Total lie. And I'm thinking, okay, it's got to be coming from the Baptist, so we can cut it in half at least, or a fourth, something like that. So it's up there, and I'm trying to, it's like, but every place I go, take a trip, come back, take a trip, meet with our staff, we churn this thing through this little white thing up there. So, oh my gosh, Bouge Pori, what's going on there? So finally, I decided that I need to look into it. I need to sort of figure it out, okay? So I thought, okay, I'm just going to open up a column in my spreadsheet that will allow some data to go in there so I can calculate maybe the reality, the truth of this thing. And so I began to look at it. It was about that time that Paul Watson put up his dad's cpmtr.org. Boom, it came up. I went there, and so I downloaded the videos. I'm a good hacker. I don't even know if they allowed the videos to be downloaded, but that doesn't stop me. I downloaded them. And I recorded, I took the MP3s off the vocal tracks. I cut out all of it was a training seminar, so there's lots of breaks for people to do group process stuff. So I cut all those out. I packed those all together. I put them on. I like listening to things. I'm kind of an auditory learner, so here I go. And I'm listening over and over and over to David Watson. David Watson. I love David Watson, but sometimes he can be boring, I'm listening to David Watson. And there's this thing going on. It wasn't that David is a winsome personality. It wasn't that he was an amazing speaker. He kept just sort of focusing me back on helping me rethink about the scriptures that I had read for my entire life. And little lights kept going on all over the place going, And things resonated with sort of DNA. We loved lost people here. Fundamentally, this church is really about lost people. And so, as a result of that, we chose to inconvenience ourselves on Sunday morning. Because we've discovered in our area that the Brian Starkeys of the world, when they come to that point, there's about half of them that are looking to pursue their spiritual journey in some more formal way. Going to someone's home and getting involved with people is kind of like joining a cult to them. They're wondering if you're sacrificing chickens out in the back, I mean, it's weird. And so God has called and sort of inflamed my heart for this guy, the Brian Starkeys of the world. The guys who come to a point in their life when they know, I've got everything, but I don't have anything. Something's missing. And I know many of you are focused on, ethnic populations, and you're focused on, the poor and the homeless and all kinds of stuff. But my heart is for this guy. My heart's for this guy because he's kind of forgotten, really. He's comfortable. He's got more than he should have. We love to beat the crap out of him. But love on him? Understand that he's hell-bound too? That he's a gendered image bearer. He has value. And someone needs to find out how to get the good news in front of him. And so we do that on a regular basis here. But we discovered that we didn't have a scalable model for that. There are 300,000 Brian Starkeys in our midst. And it was in the midst of that praying for those folks. I mean, we used to pray, God, hell is hot, time is short, the stakes are high. Help us get to these people. Help us put the gospel in front of them so they can understand who you are and what you want for their life. And in the midst of that prayer, I had a dream. Now, you got to understand my theological history here. I went to Dallas Theological Seminary, okay? I can tell by your laughing that many of you know. I've got some fellow graduates here, people from Dallas Seminary don't have dreams, all right? I mean, that's just a theological impossibility for us. We don't do dreams, I had a dream. Only the dream quickly turned to a nightmare. The dream was that God answered my prayers. And that was that all 300,000 people decided to come here one Sunday morning. Now, the early birds, the people that aren't chronologically challenged, they got here. They got a parking lot. They even got a seat. They even got a cup of coffee. But the people who really weren't on time, which was most of the people in that sense, they got stuck. And here is this, if you can imagine, this massive traffic jam. People stopped getting out of cars wondering why they're not moving, and people getting angry, and all kinds of stuff happening in this incredible 300,000 people trying to come to 6816 South Church Road. And I think it's pretty clear that if they were all going to Arrowhead Stadium on Sunday, or like this afternoon, opening day here in Kansas City, Hope Springs Eternal, the Royals are going to the World Series. There'll be 50,000 people down, at Kauffman Stadium. But if 300,000 people come, it's over. It's absolutely over. So in this dream turned nightmare, I began to realize that the prayers that I had and the strategy that I was executing didn't match up. I was either going to need to change my prayers or change my strategy. And so we began to think about what could happen. How could we do this? All of a sudden, that little booch pori up there in the corner started to grow. And at the same time, as I began listening to those MP3 files and began to have my focus put back on the Scriptures, to take my Western goggles off and to read the Bible as if it was given to me by Jesus, not by my theological mentors, I began to see that there might be something here. But when I first engaged this, I came in, and as I mentioned last night, sometimes people's disciples get a little radical, more radical than the actual mentor themselves. And so when I first engaged this, I had a couple of people, that had learned the stuff from David come at me and say, you just need to stop doing what you're doing. And you just need to go do this thing. We call it CPM at that time, but DMM. You just need to go do this. Because what you're doing is not effective. I said to him, look, every month, 10 new families visit Shoal Creek. 10 brand new families come. And as we survey those people, and we kind of, once they've been here for 6 months, we kind of go back in and take a little survey, we discover that 5 of those 10 families identify themselves as non-believers. Now, we think at least half of the next half are probably non-believers as well. They just don't have language to express themselves. And I just looked at him and said, look, when you can show me that you're engaging 10 brand new families, 5 of which are non-believing families, on a monthly basis, and you have an audience with them, you have a chance to engage them, then I'll stop what I'm doing. This may not be the most effective thing, but it is effective. I mean, I might be getting 5 miles per gallon, but I'm not stopped dead in the water. Something's happening. And as that was going on, I had a chance to do a test drive with my in-laws. My wife's parents are 85 years old. And at that point, my father-in-law can't drive. My mother-in-law couldn't drive at that point because she had a brain surgery, and she was on some seizure medication, and so they wouldn't let her drive, but they wanted a new car. And, you just don't argue with 85-year-old people. It's like, you don't need a new car, you can't drive, but they want a new car. And I just happened to have a friend who owned a car like they wanted, and I thought, well, this would be really cool, we'll get him one of these new hybrid cars. And he owned a hybrid, and so we went and borrowed it for a test drive. And my mother-in-law is eternally frugal, and so we're on a test drive, and she decides she wants to stop at the grocery store and buy some groceries. See, I got to get a couple things, So I think she's going in quick. I pull up at the door of the grocery store, and I just sort of choke my motor there. I'm just sitting there with my father-in-law chilling out and stuff. And she takes 30 minutes. She comes out. She gets in the car, and we start to take off. Well, just as I start to take off, there's a lady coming out the door, and she's moving rather fast, and she's got a couple bags of groceries. And as you're normally in a car and you're starting to take off, you think, okay, she's really not going to walk in front of me, So she sees I'm moving and stuff. But sure enough, she walks right in front of me. I mean, right in front of me. And if it wouldn't have been for my cat-like reflexes, I hit the brakes, squeal. The lady looks up at me, surprised. And I have a lot of self-righteousness in me, a lot of judgment crap going on, and I'm looking at her going, "You stupid idiot." I'm not. I wouldn't say that out loud, of course. It all goes on inside. I think, man, you probably deserve to be underneath the car if you're going to walk in front of cars like this. I mean, you're not long for this world. But and I don't say that out loud. It's all inside, and then all of a sudden I realize the dynamics of the situation. I'm in a hybrid car. It doesn't make any noise. When I moved, she didn't hear me. As a result, my presuppositions and her paradigms almost collided and caused her bodily harm. It was that moment that sort of gave me an understanding of what it looked like to package together what had been happening and what I thought could happen. It was that moment that we developed this metaphor called the hybrid church. On one side, there's a gasoline engine. We know it. It's old. It's reliable. Lots of people know how to work on it. Lots of people understand it. But yet, we kind of know that it's probably not the best kind of power supply for our environment. It has some downsides to it. And it can be, more or less effective depending on, how you design it. And in the hybrid car, there's also an electric engine. It's totally different. It uses different principles, different tools, it takes a different mindset to work on that engine. And so as a result, that became for us a paradigm or a metaphor of explaining what we were doing here. On Sunday mornings, we still have this attractional ministry. We still have people come. We still do crazy, fun, creative things up here. We still engage them in conversation. And we call that our come strategy. Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And so we want to be Jesus' voice in our community to say, look. And they come. They come when they get married. They're looking for a building to get married in. We are more than happy to provide the assets that God has given us for them to be involved in their wedding. All we ask is that they do premarital counseling. Just 10 weeks, 10 1.5-hour sessions that just happen to include a little Bible study. A little 3-column study, a little open the Bible. We even sometimes have to give them their own Bible. They come when they have kids. It amazes me how many men are just stunned by watching birth. There probably is no greater movement toward God in our world than the whole birthing movement. I mean, when we let men into the delivery room, it literally has, I think, changed more. I've talked to more men here. It's like, wow, this is amazing. And they come because they've got this little thing now they're responsible for. And they know they can't give it any moral upbringing, so they need to bring it and give it to someone who can. Little do they know, while they think they're stuffing their kids in our kids' zone, we are leaking the truth of God into their lives and creating a conversation with them so that they can sit down and learn to read the Bible for themselves and discover who God is. So one side, this gasoline engine, we got this thing, it's going, it's great. The other side, the electric engine. We discovered that in our process, because we have a lot of people who've come to faith here, they are eager to share their relationship with their friends. And so they have this steep growth curve. A part of their spiritual journey, a significant part of their spiritual journey, is reaching out to other people. It's amazing because they see that one of the spiritual disciplines in their life that brings more life than anything else is a front row seat to eternity. And when they have this front row seat to eternity, they have the grand opportunity to see growth happen in their own lives as they reach out. But we've discovered on our gasoline engine side, this side where they invite and invite and invite, there's about a 7-year growth curve. After about 7 years of inviting their relational network, an invitation turns into an irritation. Now, this is kind of where we've discovered about 50% of our community will come. They will come. But there's 50% that aren't coming. I don't care if we put pole dancing on this stage. They are not coming. Just not going to happen. And so, what do? We need to go to them. And so that's where our go strategy comes in. And we aggressively, from the moment someone walks in here, they begin to understand this discovery process. Every group that happens, even on the come side, every group that happens here has these 6 basic questions. They ask these questions. They have an I will statement. They have a sharing person that they're supposed to share with this week. And so from the moment they walk in, we are attacking that curve because we want to focus them on understanding that God has called them to take the gospel where they live, learn, work, and play. That is their calling. That they are the hope of the world because they are the church now. And so we aggressively recruit, train, and cast vision into our city to understand what it looks like to invite your neighbors, your friends, your relatives, and your workmates to the table and help them understand what God has to say about life by teaching them to read the Bible and apply it. You see, we made some significant mental changes here in this process. It changes that really are vital for us to all understand. And I want to run quickly through them. I won't get through them all. But first of all, we are abundantly clear that there is an elephant in the room. All right? There's an elephant in the room. And that elephant is the church is not accomplishing the job that Jesus intended for it. I think it's, you saw the video. Many of you are asking about where the video came from. That's just a promo for John Dickerson's book, The Great Evangelical Recession. Just go out and Google that. You can swipe the video like I did. Our strategy is fishing in ponds that don't have any live fish in them. We're just going around in circles. I mean, I don't know if you kind of have it clear in your mind, but you need to understand that the Christianity has never penetrated more than 33% of the world's population at any time in all of history. I heard a church leader, a very prominent church leader, tell me a few months ago that in 300 AD, 55% of the world's population were Christians. That's just not true. They're mistaken. They're reading something out of Rodney Stark's book, and they failed to understand that Rodney Stark said that I think it was more like 45% of the Roman Empire, which was not the world. You see, 33% of the world's population has never have we penetrated that. And so you and I are a part of a generation that are seeing more people go to hell than any other generation on the face of the earth. That's the legacy that we leave. I am not willing to leave that legacy. I'm just not. I'm going to go to my grave. I will not fly the church into the ground. The generation that I hand the baton to will. They will fly the church into the ground. We will become like Europe, the post-Christian world. There's an elephant in the room. We've got to do something different. If we don't do something different, we ought to be shot. Take us to heaven now, Jesus. Get us out of the way. Because our results suck. Look at this. In 2001, it was calculated that it took $1.5 million to baptize one person in the United States. $1.5 million. That's ridiculous. Last year, Gordon Conwell does a missions study every year. Last year, $710,000 globally to baptize one person. You know, it's interesting. I took these statistics one day. I called David Watson up and I said, David, this may take you a little while, but let me ask you a question. We spent some time on the phone negotiating, coming to some real numbers. We haven't finished this calculation yet, but what we came to is that in the Buchpuri story, they're at about 66 cents per baptism. Now, I know it really, especially, church leaders and stuff don't like to think in business terms. And unfortunately, that's difficult because if business leaders were in charge of the church, I don't think we would have this problem. They would look at $710,000 and 66 cents. They would fire everyone in charge and choose a new strategy. Because that strategy sucks. We had to go through some radical changes in our thinking here. So, some radical thinking of understanding what it looks like in our movement. And we realize that all ministry is attractional. It doesn't matter whether maybe you're building missional communities and all that other stuff. It's still attractional. You're missionally attractional. You've moved someplace. You've done incarnational work. You're in the neighborhood, like Jesus moved into the neighborhood, but you're still trying to make yourself attractive to people. And the reality is that we need some counterintuitive moves here. It's our leadership is all wrong. We fill the room with our gifts, our passions, our personalities, and when we do that, we don't leave any oxygen in the room for anyone else. We've learned to move forward. We got to learn to move backwards. And we've had to teach our leaders that it's not about your good facilitation skills in a group. In fact, we don't even want your group starting in your house. We want it starting in your neighbor's house. We don't want you facilitating any more than 3 times. If you're not passing the facilitation around, you're not a good facilitator. And in fact, if you find an excuse not to be there the 5th week, you are a great facilitator. Because if that thing could move on without you, it has potential. And so this idea of leaders being big, I once asked Watson, I said, does it bother you that like the 6th and 7th and 8th and 10th generation has no idea who you were? Because, let's face it. You and I, many of us, got into ministry because of the legacy we can leave in other people's lives. We want to see life change. And there's a real cancer to that because if I can't feel and see the life change, if the feedback loop doesn't come to me, I'm not sure I want to be a part of it. But in this strategy that we're talking about here for these few days, the feedback loop's not going to come to you. You're not going to hear the stories. People aren't going to come to your funeral. They aren't going to say nice things because they aren't going to know who you are. And if they don't know who you are, you have a chance to start a movement. It's that kind of leadership that's so counterintuitive. We decided that we too were going to give up on evangelism. We were going to stop training people how to share their faith. Because in the world that I live in, they don't want my faith. But they are interested in my life. And so we taught people how to share their lives. How to just open up their lives and be authentic with other people. Not just the ups, not just the Joy Jesus stuff, not just the, Holy Ghost ride thing, but also the down stuff, the real stuff. How does Jesus make a difference when you and your spouse aren't relating well to one another? And so we decided that we had to stop teaching people to be salesmen for Jesus. And they needed to learn to be event planners for God. Just learn to invite your neighbors, your friends, your workmates to the table, and just invite them with, let's read the Bible together and figure out what God has to say about life. We gave them a simple process, 6 basic questions that they could ask every time they could invite their friends and neighbors to the table and to be a part of it. So we gave up on evangelism. Now, let me just stop here for a moment and just say, this is my story. It's not your story. It's not a template for success. It's not a recipe, for being the master chef of Christianity. It's my story. And I have a leg up on you because I can live my story a lot better than you can live my story. You can live your story a lot better than my story. And so what you ought to be thinking about now is not the what's. How did you do that? How do you ought to be asking why. Because the why will translate into your culture. It will translate into your situation. And there you will be able to craft a strategy that's your story. It's not my story. Now, it's okay to use other people's language and that kind of stuff. There's nothing I'm saying here that's original with me. I am the best stealer in the universe. And that happens. I mean, those of you who speak on a regular basis, you know that. You know how to make yourself look good. I mean, you're just spouting John Ortberg, but you just want everybody to know it's John Ortberg, It's just that kind of stuff. So we gave up on evangelism because we believe that Jesus discipled people to conversion. That his focus was not about changing how they believed, but who they trusted. And that's key. I mean, that is so critical to understanding this process. We decided, as you heard this story up here today, we discovered that it was about failing, not succeeding. And so we had to change our thinking. It wasn't about success, it was about learning. People come and ask, well, how many groups you got going on, kind of stuff. And it's like, frankly, I don't really know. I mean, it's like on a regular basis, my wife trains some folks and some women involved in some mothers groups, and 6 months later, we get a text, they move out of town, and they're from Chicago, and they say, hey, we started 2 discovery groups in our neighborhood. And it just gets crazy like that. It just starts moving. You hear stories of people, and all of a sudden, as a church guy, I think, well, wait a second. You can't do that without me. Where'd you get that authority? Well, you can't think like that in this. It just moves. And so we just decided that we were going to celebrate failure, and we were going to fail faster and smarter. And so every failure is about learning. It's about learning. It's one of the reasons why that I started a thing called dmm.onthecity.org. I'd love to have it all come and be a part of it, because I'd love all of you to start understanding that we could learn faster on each other's failures if we would just simply share them. You know, we're around here, popping Twitter and, Facebook and Instagram and that kind of stuff. But what about sharing our learnings? Learnings are about success and failure. And so connecting together to understand that. Me, as a seminary graduate, I am a master in complexity. But here's one of the smartest scientists that have ever lived. I mean, we live in an Einsteinian world right now in terms of our thinking. And look what he says about science. He says, most of the fundamental ideas of science are essentially simple and may be, as a rule, expressed in language comprehensible to everyone. Now, I would submit that if it's true about science, it's true about the Bible. It's about simplicity, not complexity. And the fact is that every one of us brings complexity to the table. It just blows me away when people can go to a training. Like they can go to the human fount, David Watson. They can sit at the feet of the master. They can hear him go through this whole thing, give them a system, and they go home and they decide, I can do it better. I'm going to add a few more questions for clarity. I'm going to get this right. And it's like, are you kidding me? It sort of reminds me of cooking for Gordon Ramsay. He gives you his favorite recipe. And you go home and you cook it. You get in the middle of that recipe and you think, there's an ingredient there I don't like. I really don't like that. I'm going to throw that out. I'm going to put something else in. You cook that thing up. Gordon comes over. He sits down at your table and he takes that first bite. Now, if you've ever seen Gordon Ramsay on TV, Hell's Kitchen Master, you know what's going to happen? He's going to chew your butt out. He's going to go at you like nothing. Why do we do that? Why do we add complexity when it's simple? We just decided that until we were bloody and bruised and proved that it didn't work, we would just do the simple process and see what God would do. This may offend some of you. I've got to finish here. It's 11:59. We have to eat and go to our deal. But let me just say this. We are addicted to conferences. We are addicted to conferences. I resisted wanting to even put on this conference simply because things happen like this. Knuckleheads like me get up in front, say things that people think are the gospel truth, and they're going to go out and, that kind of stuff. I mean, if you understood how badly we do it, you would just wonder why they even put me up here. It's so messy. We have a simple training. This past week, we had a simple training. We downloaded, what should we do? And here was the simple training message to our leaders. Just ask the questions. That was it. Just ask the questions. We have a hard time getting people to ask 6 basic questions in a group. It's like, so I want you to leave this conference, and I just want you to having do it. Don't go try to teach someone. Just go do it. Don't overthink it. We try to get this idea. People ask me in training, hey, what's it going to look like in 10 years? If I knew what it was going to look like in 10 years, it wouldn't happen. I don't know. I just have become convinced that this is kind of a Jesus way of doing things. I know that sounds sort of self-righteous and blowing back at history and stuff, but I think my fingerprints have been on the scriptures enough to be able to kind of prove that. And so I'm not committed to it because 2 million people have come to Jesus in Bhojpuri, or 500,000 Muslim background believers now exist in Western Africa. I'm not committed to it because of the numbers. I'm committed to it because I've come to realize that it's a discipled way of life. It's what I'm going to do going to my grave, whether I succeed or not. It's just going to happen because people need to get their fingerprints on the Bible. God needs to be the teacher. He needs to be able to lead them to himself. The human agent has got to get out of the way. All that we need to do is testify, be a witness of the power that's in us, not explain and persuade people to come to Jesus. We've got a whole host of a church in the U.S. that believe in Jesus, but they don't trust him. They don't understand. Sometimes I think our translators have messed us up because they put the word faith in there rather than trust. There's more action in trust. There's a matter of allegiance that exists that is so necessary. So whatever you do, come tomorrow and David and we do the download and the next step stuff. Whatever you do, just effing do it. Don't talk about it. Don't tweet about it. Don't go do it. And let's change our world. Let's create some stories that change the bride of Christ that exists in this northern hemisphere. That's my city. That's what I love. I went to a Burlingame. As Ben mentioned, we met out there. We spent 2 weeks in a hotel watching airplanes land at SFO, out in this beautiful place. We had some great time, and I went there for a church, or just a little area of Kansas City. And city team put me in a group. It was called the City Group. They were all these people, Hermie and Kyle and Ben and Trudy, and all these people were focused on the cities. And I'm thinking, I don't want to talk to you because I'm not interested in a city. But again, it was one of those moments God broke my heart and brought me back to this. To build a strategy for a city. To focus on what it would look like. To catalyze a movement for a city. How could we take these counties? How could we take the tracts that exist inside these counties? How could we take the census blocks that exist inside these tracts? How could we take the census block groups that exist? And how could we plant self-replicating discovery groups in every one of these census blocks? And we've developed a strategy. I realize it's preposterous, but a strategy that we believe that in the next 10 years, that we could do that. Not us, Shoal Creek, but partners. Guys like Mission Southside on the south side of our city who have a heart for bringing help and hope to people and are just cranking it up now to be able to be a force for the kingdom in that area. And now I can't get this city off my mind. I used to pray for 300,000 people. And God has forced me to pray for 2.3 million people. But He's given me a strategy that I believe is doable. I think now my strategy and my prayers match up. And I have the opportunity, as long as I'm alive. I turned 60 this year. I know I don't look like it, but I turned 60 this year. And those of us, who are tipping the scales in those kind of years, we realize we don't have much time left. We just don't have much lifetime, and so we're not interested in wasting it. I'm just sort of obnoxious at times. I understand that, but I just don't have much time left, and I weep sometimes. I weep sometimes because of the years I wasted. And I realize, I know some of you are kind of come and tell me, God got you there, blah, blah, blah. I got it. Okay, I got that. But my heart breaks that I don't have 40 years. My heart breaks because I truly believe that God is going to reach my city. And He's going to do it in ways that I can't even imagine. And so now we pray, not for 300, but for 2.3 million. So would you bow your heads with me? I want to bring Ben back up here so we can go to lunch. Let's pray. Father, I know that folks sitting in this room, some on the internet, represent hundreds of millions of people. And so I pray as we read in history about these significant meetings that took place, where people came together with a heart for executing your kingdom upon this earth, and we look back and we see that this was significant. I pray that this meeting might be that way. That there will be men and women here whose hearts will be captured for their city, whatever that is. Whether it's people who dress in silk suits or people who can't even put shoes on their feet because they're so poor. I pray that you would catalyze in us a courage to be small, to be unseen, to let you be the teacher, to let people get their fingerprints on the Bible, let you lead them to your Son, and let you do what you want to do with your creation. Thank you for Jesus. We pray in His name. Amen.